So other places for mold exposure. Let's talk about some of the, where do you get mold from? So most people, when thinking about mold, they're thinking about mold in the home. So there's water leak or water damage. But I want to also bring up to your attention that there are some foods and some things associated with food that can also increase your exposure. And it's my experience is that it's not generally, these things are not usually what make a person sick, so much as that a person starts to not be able to tolerate these things when they're in mold. And so it's because these foods generally can have high levels of mold and mycotoxins in them. And in the US, some of your mycotoxins, there are rules where we have a certain upper limit of mycotoxins that are allowed in some foods. But for example, some types of mycotoxins, for example, ochratoxin A, which is a type of mold toxin that is produced by a mold called Aspergillus, there's no set limit. So they don't even test for it in the US. Now in European nations they do, but in the US we don't even test for it here, which blows my mind because it's one of the most dangerous mycotoxin carcinogenic compounds that causes cancer. But these foods, coffee, peanuts, grains, which is, remember, no grain, no pain. Why do we talk about not just no gluten, no pain? We talk about no grain. One of the reasons why is high contamination of mold and mycotoxins of grains. Alcohol, what is alcohol made out of? For most, alcohols are made out of grain, right? And so you get contaminated grains producing a contaminated beverage. But this is especially also true with wine. There have been a number of research studies showing that mycotoxin levels are above the limitation set as standards. And especially this is true of red wines. The longer you store them, the greater the potential as well. So alcohol is a big one. A lot of people, what happens, they're in mold and they drink their whole life. They've had a glass of wine or they've had some alcohol, and then once they start getting in mold, they find, wow, why can I not have a glass of wine without being wrecked for the next day or for the next week? So if you find yourself where you had an entire lifelong ability to tolerate these things, and then you hit a point where you can no longer tolerate them, and it's across the board, you might start thinking at mold as a potential, because these are all foods that are commonly contaminated with mold and mycotoxins. So sometimes it's what you're exposed to in your environment, and sometimes it's what you eat directly. But again, alcohol, soybeans, fruit juice, grains, peanuts, and coffee. Now, one of the other things that we'll see is there's these coffee machines with the pods. You see these, right? And so they have like a water chamber in them, and you put the water in and it pulls it through a tube, heats the water up, and the pod, basically the water runs through that pod and creates your beverage, your coffee. The machines themselves, these pods are used in, oftentimes can be contaminated with mold. I've actually seen a few cases where the mold was in the machine and it was making a person sick. The other thing we'll see oftentimes is water bottles. When you have a water bottle with a very narrow lid or opening, and it's like for example, the bottle is shaped more like where it narrows on its way up, and so you might drink that water, and so it's this area right here. It's hard to clean. This area right here is hard to clean, and you sometimes will see mold growing in these types of water bottles. So you've got to be cautious and really make sure you have good water bottle cleaning hygiene, because if you're not using plastic water bottles and just throwing away the bottle every time, you want to just make sure you're cleaning out your water bottle really, really well, making sure. I've seen cases where people had mold contaminated water bottles. Not a good thing, because now you're drinking the mold in your water. So again, these are just other areas where I've seen people get exposure. These are all foods where people can get exposure to molds and mycotoxins as well. Okay, we also sometimes will see exposure in vehicles, in cars, right? And one of the things that happens is unfortunate, but in the car industry, you get a major flood or you get a big hurricane that comes through, and you have a lot of cars that are water damaged, right? They were trapped on the intersection. The water came up and flooded the car out. Well, what happens to those cars? A lot of them get sold and they go to auctions. They clean them up. but they don't get the mold out of them, and then they turn them right back around to used car lots, and they start selling them to people. So people can pick up these flood damaged vehicles that can be sources of mold. So flood damage is a common problem in the car industry itself. And you've got, depending on your vehicle, if you've got kids, sometimes kids spill stuff, right? And so I generally, in my car, I don't like kids drinking or eating in it because, kids are kind of messy, right? So you get those spills, those big spills into the carpet, right? What happens? For mold to grow, you only really need moisture, and you need some kind of mold food like glue or debris, cellulose, and you need about 48 hours. So your kid spills a big soda, right? It's full of sugar on your carpet in your back of your car, and guess what? Now you got a huge mold fest that's going to happen in that car. So spills are a major reason why. And the two people that own convertibles, if there's a greater potential for a roof leak, they can come in, and so you can get water coming into the vehicle consistently when the weather changes, and so the vehicle itself might be a source. There's one more on this, and that's the air conditioner. Sometimes those things, and especially if you live in a hot area, those air conditioners, humidity, you get moisture trapped in those, and so if you turn on your AC and you can smell must or mold, you got a problem. You got a mold problem in your air conditioner. And if you live in a place like Texas where it gets really, really hot in the summer, and every time you get in your car, you're blasting yourself with moldy air, that could be a potential problem for you. So again, be aware that the vehicles are sometimes a source of exposure. Now then we come to water damaged buildings. Water damaged buildings are common. And water damage happens in more ways than what most people realize. So most people, when they think of water damage, they think of flood, leaks, roof leak, a flood, water coming into the home itself from the outside, pipes busting, that kind of thing. Like those are common. ACs are leaking. But a lot of times where we see an issue is right here. And I put a couple stars by this one because this I see happening more and more commonly because of the speed at which homes are being built today. Homes are going up in 3 to 4 months. A lot of it is wet wood, and then they're drying in sheetrock around wet wood. And so what do you got? You got sheetrock, which is food. You got moisture in the wood itself, and you've got a perfect habitat for mold to grow. So that's an example of a construction issue. I've seen construction issues where the HVAC systems were installed improperly, and so you had condensation forming on the coils, creating a source of moisture that mold could grow. I've seen it where a construction issue where they put a vent, so like a dryer vent, dryer vent not going into the main vent, but just a dryer vent going right into the wall, right into the wall itself. I've seen that where they've hooked up dryers where they just cut a hole in the sheetrock and shoved the dryer vent right into the sheetrock, driving all that moisture from drying your clothes directly into the wall. So that's an example of a construction defect. Hooking up fans like moisture fans in the bathroom improperly. I've seen those where they're just blowing the moist air directly into your attic. And that, again, those are just construction defects. One of the things, if you're buying a new home or a used home, either one, is you want to hire an inspector. Obviously, most people do. It's in a lot of places, it's pretty standard practice, but you want to hire an inspector. That's one, hire an inspector to protect your asset. Two, hire a mold inspector to look at the home for potential for construction issues around the possibility for mold to grow. And a mold inspector will also do things like measure humidity. If the house doesn't control humidity well, and this is common when the AC units are oversized, the humidity in the home will not be properly controlled. It goes up, you increase the risk for mold growing. Anything over 55% humidity increases the risk for mold to propagate and grow. So, again, these are common types of issues. There's 1,000 possibilities here, but if you're looking at purchasing a home, whether it's new or used, these are two people that I would highly encourage you to go in, because a lot of the homes today, they do have mold issues. They're just kind of covering them up. And it's my opinion that mold infestation of our infrastructure is one of the top health problems that we face in industrialized countries, period. It's one of the biggest health crises that we're facing right now. So these are examples, but again, we talked a little bit more in depth about mold inspection last week, and you go back and review that. Hey, don't forget to check out the rest of the series right here. Make sure you hit subscribe below. And as always, thanks for tuning in.